It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and I have a way to make international basketball interesting, or at least more interesting in the United States than it currently is. It involves one Ja Morant, plus a major announcement for the Locked On Podcast Network yesterday. The No Ceilings crew of NBA draft coverage fame joining the network. I'm going to take a look at some of what they had to say about Cedric Coward and Zach Edey, plus games to watch with the NBA schedule reveal coming up soon on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Wednesday episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, once more with you, once more flying solo. No DeMichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. He will be my wonderful co-host back with you on our Friday edition of the show. The NBA schedule will almost certainly be out by that point, and he'll have all the nuts and bolts and things to look at regarding that schedule. I'm going to do a little bit of a preview of that, but obviously the full thing will be out in full force by the end of the week, and DeMichael will have you covered on our next edition of the podcast. But I'm with you on this midweek edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, all the different places that you can get podcasts. Make sure that you are making myself and DeMichael a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. And I am so grateful that you're with us in the depths of the dog days that is NBA August, or NBA August, if you want to put it that way. And I'm excited to be with you on this edition of the show. I think we have a pretty fun program put together here. Again, DeMichael and I made the choice. We're going to go about 3 episodes a week in the month of August because we don't want to insult your intelligence. We want to make sure that these are things that are worth discussing, worth the 30 minutes that you choose every time an episode comes out to spend with us. We value that time. We value your time. We want to make sure that there is relevant conversation for us to share. And I do think that this initial topic is very relevant because the NBA is clearly trying to expand globally, right? It may never be as popular as the worldwide football, soccer, as it's called in the United States. Quick sidebar, one of my favorite taunting chants in all of sports is when ignorant Americans such as myself chant "it's called soccer" on the global stage at World Cup events and things like that. It makes me very happy, brings me great joy. But I digress. In reality, the NBA is probably never going to be soccer, but there's definitely a lot of translatable pieces. The silly NBA Cup, for example, whose schedule gets announced in full later today. I refuse to talk about the NBA Cup. You know, I guess I could wait to do an episode about the NBA Cup. DeMichael can talk about the NBA Cup because I don't want to. Maybe if he doesn't cover it on Friday, I can make fun of it a little bit more next week. But I am of the mind that as hard as I am on Adam Silver, the worst commissioner in professional sports, he's wise to look at the global popularity of soccer and try to make connections where he can to basketball, because basketball and soccer are similar. Soccer is one of the cheapest sports to play on the planet. All you need is a ball and something to act as goals. That's one of the reasons it's so popular globally, and one of the great ironies of American capitalism eliminating easily accessible soccer through the pay-to-play system. But this is not Locked On Capitalism. This is Locked On Grizzlies. The NBA is trying to make international basketball more of a thing, whether it's their relationships in Europe that they're trying to continue to build. I think, personally, that a great way for the NBA to try to dip their toes a little bit more completely into this water is for them to go a little bit more in with these FIBA tournaments, the AmeriCup, FIBA Asia Cup, all sorts of different things going on, okay? Eurobasket is probably the biggest tournament of them all. Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, Giannis, Larry Markkinen, Franz Wagner, Alperen Sengun, they're all playing in this Eurobasket tournament over the summer. And those are some of the best players on the planet, right? Nikola Jokic, I mentioned on my Locked On NBA 100 ranking a few episodes ago. My number one guy, I believe I had Luka Doncic number 5-ish in those rankings, number 4-ish in those rankings. Giannis was number 3. So 3 of the top 5 or so players in the entire planet, and certainly in the NBA, are playing in Eurobasket. And you do not see United States-born players participating. I got the idea for this topic of conversation from Good Morning It's Basketball by Tom Ziller. Great newsletter that you certainly should subscribe to if you don't already do so. And he talks about how Javonte Smart and Langston Galloway are probably the most famous players on the United States basketball team. Now, that's not going to drum up a bunch of interest in the States. It's just not. But you know who would draw up a lot of interest? To bring this back to the Grizzlies' perspective? Ja Morant. Now, obviously, it's too late for that at this stage, and this is more of a long-term plan and thing. The NBA needs to do a better job incentivizing players to participate in these events. Because in a star-driven league, which is very much what the NBA is for better or worse, if you want fans to tune in the summer, you got to have stars. You got to have these guys actively participating in these processes. Now, from a competitive standpoint, especially on the international stage, in fairness to these American players, these tournaments this summer, and Tom does a great job explaining this in his newsletter, none of these tournaments get you into FIBA World Cup qualification. In fact, and this is directly from Ziller's newsletter, the teams in this summer's continental tournaments are already in the World Cup qualification round. They're already there. The only ones that are actually playing with stakes this summer, like Jamaica, are late entries into the qualification process. There's no incentive for the United States or Canada to actually try to play. And these tournaments are not that big of a thing in the States. That's just reality. Nobody is clamoring to tune in to watch AmeriCup. But over in Europe, and Tom puts it really well here, pride still matters. Jokic, Doncic, Giannis, they are passionate about their teams. But when the teams play in November and February, obviously they will not actively participate because they have their NBA seasons going on. NBA players nor high-end EuroLeague players can take time off to play in World Cup qualifiers, so there's always a chance, however slight, that FIBA's ridiculous schedule will knock some of the biggest players in the world out of the governing body's biggest showcases. This is, again, from Ziller. One of these years, an NBA-laden team like France, Canada, or even the U.S. is going to get eliminated because the third tier of star isn't good enough. He goes on later on in the article to say, if Team USA had to qualify for the World Cup by placing high in AmeriCup, maybe you get Anthony Edwards, Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson heading into the tournament. I would add Ja Morant to that list because Ja Morant has been floated as a possible international playing contender. And again, we're talking about star power here. We saw the international tour recently. We know that Ja has a top-selling jersey. We see the Ja threes selling out in mere moments on the Sneakers app. Ja Morant is one of the biggest stars in the entire National Basketball Association. And if you're willing to have his Memphis Grizzlies go overseas around Martin Luther King Jr. Day and skip that important day in Memphis to be on the international stage against the Orlando Magic in the middle of January, finding ways to getting a guy like Ja involved in this tournament moving forward or tournaments like it moving forward. That is how you drum up attention. That is how you get eyes on the product. And I think FIBA has to step up and assist in these World Cup qualifying kind of conversations. Add incentives, give reason to have skin in the game. These tournaments are wonderful opportunities for players that are on the fringe of true superstardom. Jalen Brunson was mentioned in that article by Tom Ziller. Ja Morant's in the same tier as far as I'm concerned. Now, because of injuries and the suspension, if you want to say Brunson's a little bit better, I'm not going to say you're crazy. But they're in the same stratosphere. I would love to see Ja in that situation, going out there, competing on behalf of Team USA, and perhaps more importantly, showing that he can compete at that high of a level in those situations. We that have followed the Grizzlies, we know that you call 12 when things get tough and when you need a bucket that late in games. Wouldn't it be cool for the United States to start calling 12? Maybe go from regional to a little bit more national. It's a win-win for me. Now, Ja could get hurt. The money may not be right, how they, the players don't really get paid for this. Obviously, Ja has obligations to Nike and other things. I'm curious what you have to say. Do you want to see Ja Morant playing international basketball? We've seen Jaren Jackson Jr. do it, right? Do we want to see Ja get in that mix? Are you too worried about his injuries? Let me know in the comments or hit me up on X at Joe Mullinax. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, major news broke yesterday. The No Ceilings crew, NBA draft coverage gurus, now parts of the NBA, Locked On NBA podcast network. We're going to talk about how they perceive Cedric Coward, Zach Edey, and more coming up next here on the show. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, hopefully it's my Commanders, this is your moment. Here's the flyer on the MVP race. Spoiler alert. It's been decided it's Jaden Daniels, the mighty quarterback of your and my Washington Commanders. I'm a Jaden Daniels guy. I think he's winning MVP. That's going to be my flyer that I take on August 26th, FanDuel's Futures Day. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bet now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. So again, a really cool announcement was made this past Tuesday. It was the No Ceilings crew at No Ceilings NBA. I'm a big fan of their coverage of the NBA draft. They have lots of different stuff going on, but one of the things that they're going to be doing, the thing that I care the most about, the thing that hopefully you care the most about, is the No Ceilings crew joining the Locked On Podcast Network, their team, along with us as your team every day covering the NBA. And I think they do a phenomenal job, and I'm very excited to be associated with them. They certainly put us all on a different plane in terms of continuing to get our work and their work and everyone's work out there, legitimized for the world to see. Rafael Barlow did a great job in that role, the Locked On NBA Draft podcast before, and No Ceilings is certainly going to take that and run with it. I had a little bit of fun with these guys because you know me, dear listener, dear viewer. What am I if not a bit of a fun guy, right? I like to cut it up, as the kids like to say. So I reached out to the No Ceilings crew on X, at Joe Mullinax, if you want to follow me there. Very excited to ask these guys where they would have selected Zach Edey and Cedric Coward in their respective drafts. Now, if you're an everydayer, you are well aware of my propensity and ability to start small fires online. And that was kind of what I was going for here. I was trying to poke a bear. And Matt Moore at HP Basketball, I love you, buddy. You took the bait. You did it. You reached out. I'm glad you're an everydayer checking out the show, talking about Zach Edey as an all-star. You just can't help yourself. My man Matt Moore, about my boy Zach Edey. But I wanted to see what these guys thought. And here are some of the things that they said in reply. No Ceilings account at No Ceilings NBA specifically said, we have a saying around here. When in doubt, draft Coward. And I personally really like that philosophy. Now, it's not quite as aggressive as my favorite philosophy regarding the success of, or hopeful success of, the great coach, or the great Cedric Coward. Coach Thorpe, right? David Thorpe, that's the guy. I was hoping for a second overall pick argument in that reply. But, when in draft out Coward, maybe they would have had doubts in the second overall pick, and they would have gone with Cedric. So I'm cool with that. They like the Cedric Coward selection. Maxwell Bumbach at Bombboards, Baumboards. He said an extremely pro-Coward household. Guy shot 70-some% on 2-point buckets. What's not to like? 7'2" wingspan. The guy's a baller, man, or at least in theory, he's a baller. We got to see it in action, of course. Nathan Grubel at Draft Deeper had Coward as a top 20 prospect and Edey as a top 10 prospect. Edey as a top 10 prospect. Zach Edey went number 9 overall to the Grizzlies. Had Edey's best fits as the Trailblazers and Grizzlies. Memphis has always identified talent well during the John Morant era in both drafted and undrafted markets. I like you, Nathan. I like Draft Deeper on X. I think you're on to something there. And I also like how the reality of the situation when it comes to players like Edie and Coward is it's almost like at this point, 7 years now almost into the Zach Kleiman regime, when they make a selection, it raises eyebrows in the internet community in particular, the social media community in particular. The internet basketball world respects the Grizzlies' draft prowess. And it's not all home runs, right? There's a David Roddy for every Zach Edey. There's a failed opt-in on Jake LaRavia for every Jalen Wells. But there are Jalen Wellses, right? And I do think it's important to point out, again, shout out to @HP Basketball, Matt Moore. Jalen Wells doesn't need to be talked about because we talk enough about Jalen Wells being the steal of the draft. He had a lower bar to clear. Zach Edey was a lottery pick, right? After somebody said he was the worst selection in the history of the NBA draft. Cedric Coward was questioned to be traded up for and given up for as much as Memphis gave up to move up to select him, because of the injury concerns with the shoulder and the fact that he didn't play a ton of Division I basketball. So Edey and Coward are probably the two most controversial selections of the Memphis Grizzlies at this point of their draft process, at least in the last couple of years. I was curious as to what they thought. I think that one of my biggest takeaways, one of the things that I'm most excited about when it comes to this No Ceilings partnership, is that these guys clearly understand how the draft process operates. These guys are extremely aware of how the game of basketball interacts with the prospect analysis side of things. I mentioned Maxwell earlier. Back in 2023, he wrote about the gravity of Zach Edey, a really wonderful piece that he wrote as an offensively dominant player, a defensive deterrent. Sure, there's limitations, even though he has a high motor, getting beat down the floor because of his size. Again, if you haven't read it, it's at NoCeilingsNBA.com/P/the gravity of Zach Edey, the prospect overview. He does a great job making a very strong first-round argument for him in the article, and obviously the Grizzlies wound up agreeing with him. I think that the really cool thing, I like being around people that are passionate, right? Now, you can say a lot of things about me. You can say I'm an idiot. You can say I'm bald, I'm fat. All those things would be true. Disinterested is not one of the things that you can say about me. I am passionate about Memphis Grizzlies basketball. I am passionate about the city of Memphis. You combine those two things, and it's why I still do what I do here with you, literally right in this moment. It ain't about the money, right? Although I like making money. But it ain't about that. It's about me loving the city of Memphis and their Grizzlies and wanting to stay connected. I have tremendous respect for people that wear their passion on their sleeve and pursue it. And the No Ceilings crew does just that. They are passionate about this process. They love diving into film. They have so many different viewpoints. I love how there's multiple members of the No Ceilings family that are going to contribute to this podcast and give so many different perspectives, a really well-rounded and complete vision for what NBA draft classes will be. Their initial episode is out right now on the 2026 NBA draft. Make sure you're going and checking it out. Obviously, you got some other listens. You got to finish this episode first, of course. But make sure you're going and checking out those folks. I'm a huge fan of theirs. No Ceilings NBA on X. Again, the announcement. They have joined the Locked On Podcast Network with the new No Ceilings Draft Show, the Locked On NBA Draft Podcast with No Ceilings. That is the official title. Go and check them out. Follow, like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Make them a part of your everyday NBA content consumption. And you can bet your bottom dollar that we will have guests from the No Ceilings crew joining us here on Locked On Grizzlies in the days and weeks to come. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this episode of the show. I will not be with you for the official reveal of the schedule, so I'll give just a few inklings of what I'm looking forward to most with the schedule coming out ahead. Stick around here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, your host for this episode of the show. Flying solo once more, no DeMichael Cole. He'll be back with you to close out the week. And again, I mentioned earlier, the NBA schedule is about to drop. And I'm jealous of DeMichael because that's always kind of an easy episode, right? I do think the international angle with all the AmeriCup and Eurobasket stuff getting started, well worth discussing. Love the No Ceilings crew and very excited to have them on Locked On NBA. But the schedule episode writes itself, right? Tough stretches, times to take advantage, big games, big home games. Lots of different stuff that I'm sure DeMichael will cover on our next episode. I wanted to just kind of touch on teams and games that I'm most intrigued by involving the Grizzlies going into the schedule release. Number one for me with a bullet remains the trip overseas, the one that has, at least for 1 year, overtaken the tradition of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day game in Memphis, the Grizzlies going over to Germany, over to England, playing against the Orlando Magic. It's fascinating for a lot of different reasons. One, it's the first time that Memphis has ever been on a stage like this. This international stage, the league is trying to expand, like we talked about earlier in the program. They're not sending slappies over there, right? They're not sending guys that they don't think are going to bring in eyeballs and impressions online, that don't have the potential to go viral. They are investing in this heavily, both in terms of time and treasure. They want it to work. So the fact that the Grizzlies were chosen or their request was accepted to be part of this, that's a really big deal that I don't think we would be wise to overlook, right? So kudos to Memphis for that. It'll be interesting to see how they interact with the Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday. You know they're going to do something. They do phenomenal work in the community, the Grizzlies do. That's one of the reasons people were disappointed, was it's a really important day in Memphis, and the Grizzlies do it justice. So you hope that that continues. And then on the basketball side, it's a chance to see Desmond Bane, right? Desmond Bane, one of the greatest Memphis Grizzlies players ever in a shorter time period than you would say that about most folks. He's certainly not in the core four, but if there was a sensational 7 or 8, he's probably in that conversation now. One of the best three-point shooters in the league, one of the best offensive weapons in the NBA, now playing for the Orlando Magic, and they're going to see him twice in a row in Europe. So that's going to be really fascinating to watch play out. And I do think how the Grizzlies respond in that situation, how they represent the city, the organization at large, that's going to be really fascinating because Memphis hasn't had that stage before, ever, in the regular season. So that's going to be a lot of fun to look for. I always look forward to the NBA Cup being released, not because I find it interesting, but I find it interesting how people try to find it interesting. Again, the NBA Cup is terrible. It's irrelevant in just about every sense of the word. The courts are more interesting. The jerseys are more loud than the games themselves. And there's some competitiveness. Kudos to the players and the coaches. They want to win, right? There's incentive for them to go out there and compete. It makes those games a little bit more meaningful than they would be before. I'm just an old head that thinks, you know what? The game mattered before that, before they created an imaginary trophy, right? I guess it's a real trophy, but you understand my point. So I'm curious to see how those games are laid out, what Memphis will have, and we know their group, but how will the games be organized? When will Memphis host certain teams? When will they go on the road? Obviously, that matters a good bit. Who they place in sequence, right? Those road trips matter a lot. Teams with above 500 records from last year, teams that made the playoffs. I'm really fascinated to watch this Dallas team play, to be honest with you. And the Grizzlies will see them a lot, obviously. But a lot of folks are high on Dallas, even without Kyrie Irving. And I'm, DeMichael Cole, my partner, is one of those folks. So I'm really curious to see how that plays out. The Kyrie Irving-less Dallas Mavericks. We know what Anthony Davis is capable of. Cooper Flagg is there in Dallas now. They're a fascinating team to watch, and I look forward to watching those Grizzlies games with them. I'm also excited to watch the Spurs because, as DeMichael and I talked about on a recent episode, I'm higher on the Spurs than DeMichael is. But I think that is a team that, if the Grizzlies are able to utilize their more veteran presence in Ja and Jaren and KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, they're going to have opportunities to win pretty competitive games. And it's going to be a chance for them to push Wembanyama in terms of his pace, in terms of the physicality with Jaren and Zach Edey down low, especially Edey, in ways that Wembanyama is not used to. Wembanyama is used to being the tallest guy on the floor, not having to worry about the size of his opponents. He might be a little bit taller than Zach Edey, but he sure as heck ain't bigger. So that's a fascinating differentiation of styles. Jaren and Wembanyama are more similar than Wembanyama and Zach Edey. So how do the Spurs respond to that? How does Memphis respond to Wembanyama, hopefully after a fully healthy campaign? That's going to be something really interesting to watch play out. The Spurs are my second team that I really want to see. And then I'm going to cheat a little bit. I want to see the Indiana Pacers without Tyrese Halliburton. I want to see the Boston Celtics without Jason Tatum. I'm assuming we're going to see the Philadelphia 76ers once more without Joel Embiid. How do all of these Eastern Conference teams interact with their realities coming off of these injuries? And in the case of the Embiid one, perhaps a career-ending issue with his knees. How do the Celtics respond? Because they're still a pretty good basketball team. The Grizzlies playing against Boston, that's not going to be some game to just write off because Kristaps Porzingis and Drew Holiday are gone via trade and Jason Tatum's out with his injury. The Celtics are still going to be good. Now, they may not be title contenders, but they're still going to be a really good basketball team. The same can be said of Indiana. Pascal Siakam's still there, and the Pacers still have other young talent that really came along in that playoff run all the way to the NBA Finals that they're surely going to grow in their own way too. So how do they respond without the star maker, the creator of big-time moments and memories from these past playoffs, Tyrese Halliburton? And then I'm also interested to see, beyond those injuries, how the teams like the Orlando Magic, the Cleveland Cavaliers, how their new-look rosters respond and intermingle and intermix against teams like the Grizzlies. Because Cleveland versus Memphis, regardless of the Ty Jerome connection, those are two teams that a lot of folks saw on kind of similar paths back in the day, right? Not too long ago, they were both ascending teams that could maybe meet in the NBA Finals someday. Memphis fell apart along the way for a variety of reasons that we don't have time left in this podcast to discuss. And Cleveland had a tough second-round loss to the Pacers, but with Halliburton out, the Celtics reeling a little bit with Jason Tatum not in the mix. It's Cleveland's conference to lose in the eyes of many. So teams like Cleveland, teams like Orlando, how they respond in the new look Eastern Conference, those are all games. I can't wait to see those teams play against this version of the Memphis Grizzlies. So many questions to answer, and we'll continue to do our best to do so as the offseason grinds forth here on Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As I mentioned earlier, DeMichael will be with you to close out this week. NBA schedule release, key stretches of games, road trips, homestands, and all the rest. DeMichael's going to have you covered with the schedule release and all the information that comes out over the next couple days in our last episode for the week. Check back here around Friday for that edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube. Make us a proud part of your day and make us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that episode drops. We are so grateful to be part of the now mightier, thanks to the No Ceilings crew, Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single time that an episode drops. That for us will be closer to the end of the week. Until then, and until next week, since I won't be there with you, stay safe out there. Have a great rest of your week and beyond into the weekend. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts. We'll catch you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.